Hello and welcome to the CPD Group podcast. Join us as we guide you through all things CPD, interview some special guests and offer advice to help your business thrive. We hope you enjoy listening. Hello everybody and welcome to CPD TV podcast. As part of our series of videos, what we're doing today is inviting one of our actual providers to the table. So we've got Adam Lacey here from Assemble U today, who's going to talk to us about how to create a podcast, how to actually put learning into a different medium in such a way as a podcast. Okay, so Adam, nice to meet you. Thank you very much for joining us today. How are you?
Yeah, hi Andy. Pleasure to be here.
Good man.
And I'm very well, thanks.
Super. As I say, thank you very much for joining us. It's great to get people like yourselves involved in these kind of podcasts, just to give our network a bit more information about how to do things, and how to really help project their business a bit further across the world. So tell us about yourself and tell us about Assemble U, Adam.
Yeah, so I'll start with Assemble U and then I'll maybe just tell you a little bit about our kind of journey so far, if that's okay. But Assemble U essentially offers podcast style audio courses designed to enable learning on the go. So we create succinct, easy to listen to audio courses that fit around the busy lives of our students, or the people wanting to upskill. So how we do it is we take a complex topic, research it, pull out the critical elements. We then work that into a script with learning objectives, clear actionable outcomes, all that kind of stuff. We then use professional voice actors to voice it, so it gets a kind of studio quality feel. And it's a bit like a short podcast, but it's specifically designed for the transfer of knowledge. So what we're trying to do is basically cross that bridge between podcasts that you're probably quite familiar with, this kind of format, where, two people chatting, and something a bit more formal and structured to aid learning in the best way possible. And yeah, the idea basically came about because my cousin and I, my business partner is my cousin, by the way, family business. We were doing a lot of our own learning via podcasts and audiobooks. We weren't sitting down and watching, video courses or things like that, simply because we didn't have time. And also we spent so much time at the screen all day anyway, on calls, various other things, that it just wasn't a good kind of modality for us to learn. We didn't find it a productive place. Whereas putting a podcast on when we went for a walk, or listening to an audiobook in the car or something like that, that really worked for us. So we kind of came up with the idea of, well, why isn't there more kind of formal structured learning, be that CPD kind of learning or any skills-based enhancement, delivered via audio, and that's kind of where the idea for Assemble U came about.
Excellent stuff. No, I totally agree with you. I mean, there's lots of different mediums how learning's absorbed, isn't it? And it's just very much down to the individual consumer of CPD as to how it best works for them, isn't it? So I'm hoping to learn a lot from you today in terms of how to put on a podcast, because as you know, we're new to this and it's something that we're looking to push forward with and try to get information out there. So, breaking it down into its basics, Adam, taking it right back. What is a podcast?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's probably different definitions of it, but I'd define a podcast of any sort of spoken word recording in a way. I guess audiobooks are slightly different when it's a book being read out, but there are quite a few different ways to teach using audio. So, and I think that's an interesting one. A podcast tends to be a catch-all term. We've actually started using words like audio courses, audio lessons, phrases like that to differentiate a little bit, because in people's minds they hear podcast and they think, oh, that should be free, or or they've got a very specific idea of what they're expecting. That should be two people like this having a conversation, when actually really a podcast or an audio resource, a learning audio resource, can be a variety of different methods. So two people chatting, that's great. Interview style can be single voice with something that's scripted and read out. It can be multi-voice. You can have sound effects in some podcasts. You can really have a more kind of immersive experience where you're in the jungle and you can hear the frogs croaking in the background, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot you can do with audio, and there's lots of different, I guess, approaches to it. And we'll talk a little bit more later, I believe, about how we put kind of things together. But I think my first message on this would be to think quite broadly about audio when you're looking at podcasting, and how you can enable learners with audio, because there's more than one way of doing it.
Yeah, great stuff. Now you've sort of touched on this already through our conversation so far, but is why are podcasts great for CPD delivery?
They're really good for certain subjects, and I'd say they're really bad for other subjects. So I always kind of caveat that, because if I'm learning to code in Python or something like that, listening to somebody explain how to do it's probably not going to be as helpful as me actually having a sandbox environment and a screen and blah blah blah, and being able to get in there and do it. So I think there's a lot of any kind of good learning design, you need to think about what you're teaching and what is an effective way to transfer that knowledge from teacher to student. But I think why they're really great, and actually why they've kind of grown massively in popularity over the last 10 years in particular, is just that enabling of dead time and fitting in around people's hectic schedules and hectic work-life balance, fitting between that work and life balance that we all struggle to keep on top of. So if you can listen to something while doing something else, and you can in most cases, that's a real enabler, because you can be driving, you can be walking the dog, you can be at the gym, you can be doing the dishes, you can be doing menial tasks, even like menial admin or something like that, and still listening and absorbing and learning. Now, obviously, there's different opinions on if you're concentrating heavily on something else and you're listening, are you really listening? Are you absorbing that? And so there's all that to consider as well. But the big reason that people like them so much is that they are just convenient for many people. We actually ran a survey at the beginning of this year where we're actually asking podcast listeners about their kind of interests and how they listened and what they learned and all that kind of stuff. And interestingly, 86% said they were not supplied with audio learning by their employer. And in that group of 86% of them said they were more likely to engage with learning from their employer if they were given audio-based learning as a kind of option. So seems to be a big gap, if you like, between what's happening in learning and development, in traditional learning and development, where there's still a lot of e-learning or in-person delivery, and actually what's happening in the consumer world, where you see the meteoric rise in podcasts, the amount of money Spotify is spending on shows, and the amount of money BBC has put into BBC Sounds, all that kind of stuff, because there's huge audiences there and people are using it, versus what's happening in learning and development. And yeah, that's really interesting, and that's where we feel like the opportunity is. And I'm sure some of the people listening to this show might be thinking, oh yeah, that was interesting there, we could add audio to what we're doing, and it's not that difficult to add an audio option on, I'd say.
That's quite interesting statistics though, isn't it? 86% is quite a lot, isn't it? Traditional classroom-based learning, there's been a big switch away from that in many different arenas recently, hasn't there? There's lots of different reasons behind that, whether it's economic or whether it's time factors, because employers don't, a lot of them don't have time to release their staff for long periods of time to go to classroom-based learning, so the audio stuff is really starting to make a big push, is what we see here when we're accrediting courses as well. So having a look at, a podcast, and again, this is something that I'm hoping you might be able to advise me on, is how do you set up a good podcast?
First thing you got to think about is what are you trying to achieve? So what's the purpose of the podcast? Are you setting one up to teach people? Is it a set of audio lessons, audio courses? Is it for marketing? Is it for exposure? A lot of businesses, a lot of B2B companies out there using it as a way to talk about the problems that their audiences have. And the podcast might be very, very niche or very specific, and their listenership is never going to be very big. But if the people that are, their potential buyers are the ones listening and finding it interesting, then that's a really nice low touch way to open up a conversation. So we're seeing that a lot actually in terms of lots of kind of very, very, very niche or very specific podcasts in certain industries, solving certain problems using as a marketing tool. So think about what you're trying to achieve, because that will determine how you set it up, what kind of people you interview if you're going to do that, how you script, what you research if you're going to take that route, and then really think about your target audience. So what do they want to hear? And it's got to be stuff that's going to be interesting to them. So what are the problems they're trying to solve? What are the issues that are coming around the corner tomorrow for them that you can kind of get ahead of and help them kind of think about? And if you're interviewing people, who would be good guests for that, and be very kind of targeted about who you ask to come on. I think that's always important. And then, like, on a more kind of practical level, and we'll talk about the technical stuff in a bit, but on a more practical level, how much time do you have to allocate to this, and what are you going to do with that content? Are you going to make it freely available? Are you going to sell it? And so think about how you're going to settle that up as well. And just from someone that I run 2 free podcasts at the moment as part of our marketing and sales effort. One's called the Power Skills Project, and one's called Learning and Development Challenges. And the effort to create episodes for both of them is really high. It takes up a lot of my time, like too much of my time, in fact. So with the Learning and Development Challenges podcast, we're actually just doing that in series. So we'll release a set of 10 as a series, have a bit of a break, and then come back to it and do another kind of sprint, if you like, to release another set, rather than there being an ongoing commitment. The Power Skills Project that we have is currently released every other week, and that is a bit more of a slog, because you have to find somebody and make sure you've got an interview in the can ready to go and edited for that time, because you don't want to miss that deadline. Because one of the great things about podcasts is that consistency. You'll know it from listening to podcasts that you know and love. If you listen to one every week and one week it's not there, you kind of feel a bit, oh, well, that's, I always listen to this on a Monday morning on my drive to so-and-so, and now it's not there. That's put me out of sorts for the week. That's that's how I like to start the day. So yeah, I think you've got to be very careful about that as well. And don't underestimate if you want to do like an ongoing series or something like that, don't underestimate the amount of effort required to record and then edit and find guests and, pre-interview guests. Like, we had a chat before this conversation to make sure, we were going to be talking about something good. And there's a lot of setup, and then there's obviously all your post-production as well. So yeah, just make sure you know what you're getting into from a time point of view.
Yeah, I mean, just on that last note there, I mean, I've seen the guys that we work with here, from our marketing team, who are doing all that post-edit stuff. Post-edit stuff. And yes, there's so much that goes into it. Even just setting up the room for us to come in and do a conversation like this seems to take an awful long time. I didn't imagine that at all, to be honest. I was one of those quite naively thinking you just turn up and sit in front of a mic and away you go. But it's completely different to that. And but yeah, great. That's great advice. Thank you. But looking at kind of who these podcasts are aimed at. So again, we've identified the audience, that kind of thing that you've mentioned. So what would be your advice in terms of creating specific learning content, educational stuff, that really is there designed to upskill somebody, CPD?
Yeah, definitely. So it's very similar to designing any piece of learning. So if you were designing a day-long course, or if you were designing a piece of e-learning or something like that, very similar concept, but you're doing it with the understanding that person probably isn't going to be looking at a screen. So you just need to make sure that, you're explaining everything in a good way, and not relying on visuals. Like if we're doing a webinar or a presentation, you might say, oh, look at this slide and see this data here, without actually explaining what the data is doing. It's quite different if you're doing a podcast. It's like being on the radio. You need to be more descriptive with everything that you're covering. You need to design it to be listened to rather than almost interacted with. And so there's a certain amount of I guess passiveness sometimes with audio, with e-learning, or I guess in person, there's a back and forth. With audio, you are, as the listener, kind of sat there absorbing. You know, whether that is worse in terms of learning adoption, or kind of being able to quickly onboard the knowledge that you need. Who knows? But I think the important thing is that you design with that in mind. So, like, for example, our not to plug our stuff, but we went through all this thinking when we were designing our product, and our courses are only 10 minutes long, and that's we talked to a lot of people in the industry, and we tried to work out, like, what's going to be the ideal time here. Where are people going to start to drop off? Where's their concentration gonna kind of wane or disappear? And what's going to be most effective for our target audience? And we landed on this idea of a 10-minute audio where we've done a lot of the heavy lifting, and then we give them like 1 or 2 actionable outcomes at the end. So we tell them to go away and do some stuff, or think about some stuff, or reflect on some things, but we don't overload them with information. And we keep it very short for that exact reason. So yeah, it's a really interesting one, but think carefully about who your audience are, and also, like, think about where they're going to be listening. Is this going out to, is this targeting sales reps that are in the car all the time? In which case that might be slightly different to someone who can maybe get back to a screen and look at something. So, you can incorporate audio into e-learning, or have them listen to something away from the screen and come back to the screen at a later time, and things like that as well. It's just really thinking about who your audience are, what their use case is for this piece of learning or CPD, and how they're gonna engage with it.
Brilliant. That's really useful advice, Adam. Nice one. I'm sure lots of people will be able to take advantage of that information if they're looking to do their own podcasts. So, moving away from the actual content itself and looking more at the technical aspect of a podcast, what kind of equipment is a company going to need to start putting this stuff together?
So yeah, if you're recording it yourself, and you're voicing it yourself as well, then you'll want a few basics. So you want a decent external microphone for one. You and I have both got one. I use a Shure MV7. I've got it plugged into an audio interface, which gives it a really good kind of quality of sound. I've got if you're watching the video, I've got a thing called a pop filter in front, and that just stops the P's and S's that when the mouth makes those sounds, the air comes out your mouth very, very quickly, and it hits the microphone and can make a slight popping sound. And so the filter here is designed to kind of get rid of that. If you've ever seen anybody recording singing in a recording studio, they'll have one of those on. And like, this type of equipment isn't too expensive. So if you're going to be doing a podcast, if you're going to be creating, I don't know, either learning you're going to sell, or you're doing it for marketing, I would definitely invest a little bit of money in some equipment. Don't use your laptop mic or your Apple earbuds or something like that to record, because the difference is quite quite big, basically, in terms of the quality that you'll get. I think one thing to be like hyper aware of is the room that you're recording in as well. So actually, I was going to say, Andy, the room that you're in, it's got a little bit of an echo on it.
Yeah, we're aware of that. We're working on that bit. That's the next part of the project.
Yeah, and I can hear that slightly. And so, if you're doing it, probably the worst place you could record is a meeting room in an office that's got glass walls and a hard floor. That is terrible. Because any kind of really hard surface like that, sound just bounces off it, and that's where you get that echo. So if you can record in a room with soft furnishings, with carpets, with curtains, I've seen people put sofa cushions behind their laptop to create like a mini or personal kind of DIY studio. But things like that make a make a difference when you're trying to get a really good sound quality. And interestingly, there's less forgiveness on sound quality when there's not a visual. So if the only thing people have is the audio and they're listening, if the sound quality is bad, in all likelihood they'll notice it and it may turn them off. It might do your brand damage, all the rest of it. If the sound quality is good, then great. And to be honest, the expectation now is good sound quality, because it is quite easy to do yourself without, you know, a super heavy investment. You know, you don't need to be in a studio to get pretty good sound quality these days. Then you kind of, you don't want to fall short of that. So do invest in some of the right equipment. In terms of things like tools, you know, you can use Zoom or Teams or Google if you're recording remotely and if you're interviewing people. If you're just recording yourself, you can use, you know, open source tools like Audacity that are free, that allow for kind of software. It's called kind of basic recording software. I actually use Riverside for recording my podcast, which is a specialist podcast tool. I really like Riverside because it uploads the audio and the video to it kind of stores it, caches it in your browser before it uploads it. So if your internet goes down, it doesn't disturb the podcast, which is really good. So I've had it before where I've been recording on Google Meets and, you know, one person's dropped off or dropped out or something like that. And actually that's pretty annoying to have to reset. And then other things I would say, you know, that you're then into, I guess, like post-production. So if you want a really good professional finish, then you've got to spend a lot of time on editing, you know, get all the ums and ahs out, all that kind of stuff. And make sure that I'm now really conscious of using ums and ahs now that I've said that. What we normally say is for each minute of recording, you're looking at like 5 to 10 minutes of post-production. So keep that in mind when you're doing your editing. There are some great editors out there. There's lots of good freelance editors. So if it's not your area of expertise and it's not something you want to take on yourself, you can kind of outsource that work. And I definitely recommend that. It's a bit of a learning curve to get into editing. There's also some really good tools that combine, or software packages that combine AI and our audio video software tools. So things like Descript are very good at being able to do a really good first pass. They even have a little function that allows you to remove the ums and ahs just with a click of a button. It'll take them all out for you. It's very clever. It doesn't get all of them, but it gets, you know, 70-80% of them. So you can speed up the post-production process now with the right software and with the right tools. So yeah, those are my main recording tips if you're doing it yourself. Otherwise, if you're bringing in voice actors and things like that, there are a lot of people with really good home studios or access to a studio that you can outsource this type of work to. So if you have old e-learning that you're converting into audio, you know, you can just script that and get it voiced. It doesn't necessarily have to be in this kind of style where two people are talking.
Super. So Adam, like, great information there, and I hope it helps a lot of people out there. But for myself, the next thing that me and the team are working on is the soundproofing of this room that you identified earlier. So what would be your recommendation? Hanging curtains up, putting sound panels up? I mean, what would be the best way to make that echoey sound disappear?
Yeah, curtains, definitely.
Don't be like that, Adam.
He told me off camera that he didn't want curtains.
Oh, you put me right in it there, Adam. Thank you.
So in front of my screen here, I have some sound absorbent panels that came from Amazon. You can get them from loads of different places, and they just stick on the wall, and that made a big difference because I've got a wall quite close to me here, and so once I put those up, any kind of bounce back I was getting kind of disappeared because I've got like a little soundproof cubby. So yeah, sound paneling is probably the best one you can do. Under that, you know, you're looking at things like curtains, other soft furnishings. The floor makes a big difference actually. If it's like when I've interviewed people and they've got hard floors, that really kind of bounces the sound around. So yeah, carpeted floors, or put a rug down, that type of thing makes a big difference as well.
Brilliant. So moving away from the more technical side of things then, and just thinking about, our relationship with yourself and Assemble U. So how has the, your approved provider status at Assemble U helped you with, getting your podcasts out to the public? Has it been a benefit to you?
Yeah, I think it's very helpful to have an external validation, especially as quite a young company. So Assemble U hasn't been around that long. We're kind of a year and a half, just over a year and a half old. And I think having any kind of external kind of badging or validation that yes, this content has been looked at, or even that we're taking it seriously enough to go through that process as well. That's the other thing. So yeah, that's the main reason. We have it on the, we have CPD on the homepage of our website, so it's up there as one of the first things that people see when they hit the homepage.
Brilliant. I mean, we've really enjoyed working with you guys. We've done a few bits together so far. So, working with the CPD group, how's it been for you? And would you recommend it to anyone else?
Yeah, definitely. I would, you guys got tons of energy, great on socials and all that kind of stuff. And I think you do a really good job of making sure the learning companies you work with, are kind of surfaced and networked into the rest of the CPD, I guess, vendors or partners.
I would like to say a big thank you to Adam Lacey from Assemble U for joining us on the CPD Group podcast. I think you'll find the information very, very useful if you're ever looking to develop podcasts of your own. Again, thanks very much, Adam. Thank you for tuning in to the CPD Group podcast. Be sure to tune in next time for more helpful content. See you soon.